Oh, hey, freshman. Mrs. Roth here, and I'm going to introduce you to Hound of the Baskervilles. All right. So, first thing, before we start reading or even talking about this novel, let's take a look at some of these anticipatory set questions. For each of these, what you want to try to decide is, do you agree or disagree? All right. Number one, supernatural events always have an explanation. Number two, each person has a destiny that is determined before we are born. Number three, when good friends work together on something important, it's wrong to keep secrets from each other. And number four, in the end, good always triumphs over evil. All right, what I want you to do is pause this video, and then for each question, 1, 2, 3, and 4, say out loud, do you agree or disagree with those statements? All right, these statements are going to come up throughout the course of the novel. They each kind of relate to a theme or important idea, and we'll be discussing them as we work our way through the chapters. Okay, now, next, let's talk about the main character of Hound of the Baskervilles. Here's a couple clues for you to try to guess who it is. Do you recognize this hat? It's very distinctive. A pipe? Getting warmer? Perhaps this address seems familiar to you. The main character is Sherlock Holmes. You've probably heard that name. He's a very famous character, and there's lots of allusions to him in other literature and throughout our culture. This is perhaps an iconic image. You might picture something like this in your head when I say Sherlock Holmes. Or if you've been watching more recent shows, you might not picture these actors. You might picture this one. This is probably the most modern adaptation of Sherlock Holmes, and it's called Sherlock, and it's set in modern day times. Now, our book does not take place in modern day times. It takes place in Victorian times. So it takes place in London, but old school London. When you're reading the book, you don't want to picture this type of a London, this brand new Cumberbatch kind of a London. You want to picture old school London. It's called Victorian times because of Queen Victoria. Okay. The other thing is the entire book isn't set inside the city of London. Much of it is also set in the countryside, specifically in the moors of Devonshire. And Devonshire is an area of England, kind of think like a county, and it's about 175 southwest miles of London. So when you're picturing the moors, you want to picture this kind of open, picturesque, beautiful landscape. However, you might also want to know that the moors can be especially dangerous, right? Like, oh, pretty open countryside seems great, but it can be kind of spooky, right? You think of like if you took a little stroll out there at night, you'd kind of be looking over your shoulder, you'd be wondering. And especially in the moors, because the moors have got something going on that like our pastures and our open fields don't. They have boggy areas. And boggy areas are, think of like really squishy, quicksandy kind of, you can sink down into them. And if you're walking around outside in the dark and you can't see where the boggy areas are, you might step in one and you might get your foot stuck, or it might pull you in, and all of a sudden it's like quicksand, you're in trouble big time. All right. So you want to think of the moors as like a wide open, beautiful spaces, but also perhaps dangerous ones. All right. You also might not know what type of animals or critters you might meet when you're out there in the middle of the night. Do, right? Okay. So let's talk about the background and how this novel starts off. The background of this novel is by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and you'll want to know his name, and you want to think Britain in the late 1800s. Doyle is responsible for creating the character of Sherlock Holmes, and he's one of the most loved characters of all of literature, and he's inspired a lot of other characters in a lot of other literature. He's a famous detective, and he uses his unusual powers of perception and deduction, meaning he can pick up details that everybody else misses. All of Doyle's stories focus on the fictional detective and his sidekick, Dr. Watson. So Dr. Watson is always like the wingman to Sherlock Holmes. They work together and they solve most unsolvable crimes. Nobody else can do it. Bring in this pair. They're going to get the job done. Hound of the Baskervilles is probably the most well-loved Sherlock Holmes story and most well-known Sherlock Holmes story. And it is the only novel that Doyle wrote. So most of the Sherlock Holmes stories are just that, stories. You're not going to find books on Sherlock Holmes, except for Hound of the Baskervilles. The other ones, are short stories. We're not covering any of those. Just this guy in book form right there. Okay. Now, how does this book start out? Well, Holmes and Watson, right? Those are your dynamic duo there, the detective team. They're asked to investigate a curse that's allegedly hanging over the house of Baskervilles. It's a really rich, wealthy family, and they live in an ancestral mansion on the gloomy moors in the English countryside. It turns out that the name Dr. Mortimer, he's a character, he's right away in the beginning of the book. Dr. Mortimer arrives at Holmes' apartment, and he has a very curious tale. He explains that there's an ancient legend of a demonic dog that first killed Sir Hugo Baskerville several hundred years before, and he's believed to kill all Baskervilles in the region of Devonshire where the family resides. So we've got a curse on our hands here, people. Then Holmes says, that just sounds like a story. I'm not worried about stories. I don't worry about fairy tales, right? Mortimer says, hey, this is no fairy tale. We've got a situation on our hands. Something has currently happened. That's bad news. Sir Charles Baskerville was found dead in his garden, and we can't find anything wrong with him. We can't find a physical trace of harm, but he had a severely distorted face, as if he died in utter terror. All right. Then Mortimer reveals he also noticed at the scene footprints of a gigantic hound. Well, we've got this curse. And a man is dead. Okay. What kind of hound are we talking about here? What's a hound? Oh, is it this cute little puppy? A hound's a dog. Is it a puppy, a cute puppy? Or is it demonic? Is it a demonic beast? Right? So we're thinking a hound, footprints of a gigantic hound. And that kind of sets up the story. I'm not going to give you any more details because it's a mystery, my friends, and you need to figure out what happened to Sir Charles Baskerville. Okay, so we'll leave it there, and we'll jump in to this book starting this week, and we're going to find out what happened. Okay.